All right, guys, as the year comes to an end, I wanted to share with you some of the projects that I've started first on my journey of woodworking and carpentry. In this video, I'm gonna share with you 5 things that you should never do when building a window seat. Hopefully in this video, these tips will serve you well and it will allow you to create some real cool and professional built-ins. Let's get into it. All right, so the first one and probably the most disgusting one is your edges. Never load up on caulking with your edges. You can never, ever have clean seams, good looking seams, just caulking them up, right? Take the time, figure out the measurements, figure out your filler pieces, and fill those pieces as tight as you can get them. And then once you have them as tight as possible, just grab some scribe molding and finish them off. As you can see in this seam here, I used a bunch of caulking. I think I used particle board to fill that seam in, or to fill this open exposed edge. And because it didn't line up this particle board in the actual frame of the built-in, I used caulking all through this area just to try to fill a gap that was about 1/16 of an inch wide. And you can see just how disgusting it is and how built up it is. And I mean, you could pretty much just peel it away, but this is a horrible job on my behalf. Of course, I was a beginner, so a lot of the skills that I know now, I didn't know them at the time when building this. This was actually my first project that I put together. But if you can do it, take the time, figure out your measurements, your spacing, and just use filler pieces and scribe molding. I promise your final result is gonna look 10 times better than this. All right, so number 2, gleam your seams. Now, what I mean by that, it makes no sense, but what I mean by that is take your time to figure out how you're gonna butt joint or pocket hole or whatever you're gonna do to combine or join your seams. Now, with this built-in here, all I did was I built the carcass that the window seat sits on, and then I just brad nailed all the face frame pieces onto the carcass. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, if this is just a rough project for a workshop or something along the lines of that. But for this project here, because this was being used, it's in our dining room. We have family that come over. It wasn't the best fit. The seams are splitting. You're starting to see the exposed cracks and the gaps. Nothing is flat or flush. Nothing lines up. And it's just ultimately a bad looking job. It looks like a newbie did it. No offense to the newbies out there. You always have to start somewhere, but this wasn't good at all. Now, what I should have done is probably use pocket holes on the backside, simply because you don't see the other side of it. And pocket holes, as they're not a clean aesthetic, looking at the pocket holes, you'll never see the other side of the face frame of this. So pocket holes would have been great to use. I also know how to use dominoes. I have a Festool domino at the shop. Dominoes could have solved this easily. I could have just screwed these 2 pieces from up above into the rail right here, or the stile. There's so many different options I could have done outside of just brad nailing each piece onto the carcass. But at the time, I really didn't know all of those other methods. So I did what I knew how to do, right? And as you can see, it turned out horrible. And now this leads me into number 3. You probably already started to see it, but these doors. Make sure if you're gonna create shakers, do them the right way. Don't do them the sloppy way. What I did here was I took a bunch of 1/4-inch slats, mitered the edges, and just brad nailed them onto this 1/2-inch piece of plywood that sits behind that. It worked when I first started off as a beginner. It looked great, but now looking at it, it's a horrible mess that I'm gonna have to take off. The miters, of course, they were good miters and everything of that along the lines of that, but you could just tell, just looking at them, that it's a poor job. If I were to do this for a client, they would probably tell me to rip it out and they would ask for their money back. So I always tell Sam, I always tell anyone I'm working with, if it's not something you'd like to see in your house, don't ever do it in a client's home. And I stand behind that. Now this right here, don't like it, so guess what? This window seat is getting out of here. But these shaker style doors are horrible. And even the faux ones are horrible because they're peeling away from the actual built-in itself. So we're gonna redo everything. All right, so I just say they sell kits. You can buy kits at Rockler where it's a style and a rail bit that'll create your shakers for you. There are other ways of creating shaker style doors. We use the router bits, right? They do have some of those router bits. They are expensive, especially if you buy them from Rockler. You can buy some off of Amazon, but they're not as sharp. And because it's a 1/4 inch shaft, they do vibrate and wiggle around a little bit. So how tight they are at the joints and the seams may not be what you're looking for, but as a beginner, it's a great start. And then as you progress in your journey, then you can go into the 1/2 inch shaft bits where, you know, you get a tighter and cleaner fit. So that's the next one. What is that, number 3? Focus on your doors. For number 4, measure, 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 measure. All right, measure 4 times, cut once. In this built-in here, I didn't do enough of that. I think I measured maybe half of one time and I just cut, right? Because you could tell by the seat itself, it's not all the way against the wall. It's not all the way against the backside here. There's toys, there's different things that have fallen behind this window seat now that that are gonna resurface after 4 years. You could tell by the faux shaker doors, they're off. Like one is bigger than the other. Even these 2 drawers right here, one is bigger than the other. I didn't do a good job at measuring, right? I should have took the time, measured everything, and I would have had a cleaner built-in, right? We wouldn't be here at this point where now we're gonna rip this out and rebuild it. But always remember, measure, 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 measure. Measure, right? It's necessary. Just measure as many times as necessary until you get it right. And then when you do get it right, then piece it together. And if it's off, take it apart and then remeasure until it is right. Because the worst thing that you can experience is building something and then 2-3 years later, you get better at your craft and now you want to take it apart, right? So keep that in mind. And for the 5th tip, don't skip out on sanding. Sanding is so important. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You don't even need to be doing a built-in. Sanding is so important when it comes to all of your projects. Rule of thumb, 120, 180, 220. Those are typically the 3 grits that you'll want to use for a built-in project. If you do want to take it a step above that, 120, 150, 180, then 220. You really don't have to go above 220 because that's going into some real finer finishes. Stuff like that you would use for like a table, if you're doing like a river table or an epoxy table. Below 120 is a bit much. That's unless you're trying to really remove material, but you don't really need to do so. So just keep that in mind, 120, 180, 220. That'll give you a nice fine finish on any project that you're gonna paint. And then it just eliminates you having to look back at a project and saying, the paint job was nasty. All right, just keep that in mind. All right, now I know in this video I said it was 5 tips, but I'm gonna give you a bonus tip. This is something I learned later on when it came to woodworking and carpentry. But for your drawers, never use this MDF board. It is extremely too heavy. Koa, I don't know why he always thinks there's something in here for him. I don't know if he thinks there's balls in here or something, but he always comes here whenever I open these drawers. But never use these MDF boxes or plywood, MDF plywood whenever it's not even called MDF plywood. I guess it would be called MDF plywood. But never use it when you're creating your drawers. It's heavy. It's really not a good material to use. It breaks down and crumbles apart. For the fronts and the back, I used just raw wood, just regular knotted plywood. Not a good finish for your projects because whatever you have inside of here, it can scuff and peel and chip up the wood fibers from the plywood. So try to find a lumber yard local to you that sells one-sided finished plywood. That way on the inside of your drawers, it at least has some type of polyurethane finish. So if anything spills on the inside, it doesn't affect the wood and then you have to recreate a drawer. Also, there are different methods and styles of joinery that you can use. Dovetail joints, butterfly joints, all types of different joints that you can use for the sides. For this here, we just use butt joints with pocket holes on either ends, and that's perfectly fine using pocket holes, especially if they're hidden. So rule of thumb, watch out, Cole. If you're gonna use pocket holes, never put the pocket holes on the sides. If you can, put it on the front drawer because the face frame is gonna sit, or the drawer front is gonna block the pocket holes, and then put them on this back plate as well, because that of course you'll never see the opposite side. But the two sides, you'll always see those. So if you can, put your pocket holes on the front and the back, and butt joints are perfectly fine. All right? All right, guys, so that's all the tips I have for today. Hopefully these 6 tips served you well. Go out and build some cool things. Forget about being a newbie or a DIYer. You know, watch these videos, learn from other creators, and all the mistakes that we've made in the beginning of our journey, you don't have to make, right? This could have been avoided if I would have watched more videos, if I would have took the time, measured, sand, did all the tips in this video, but I didn't. So we're pulling it out and we're gonna rebuild it and we're gonna do it the professional way. So it's time to take this DeWalt sledgehammer to this window seat and rebuild it. Stick around, you'll see the next video on the new built-in that we put together. And I appreciate each and every one of you guys. Peace.